yourselves and tell us about your experience here working at the mill.
I'm Bill Pearson.
I'm Barry Black.
Barry Black. My first experience is here. I came here the first time in 67. I went by here. I was in a class at UMass, and we came by this mill and went to a couple other mills, and it looked nice. I didn't see that much. We didn't really see it in detail. But then in later years, in 1972, I had a professor at UMass, and his name was Hugh Curley, and he and his brother bought this place in the, I think it was the spring of '72, and the mill hadn't been run in a long time. I think previously had been owned by who was the guy that used to work at Kohl's and pack up all the lumber. Louis Taylor. And there were actually trees growing up at the skidway. The skidway was where the logs were put in. There were three big skids, and the log would sit on there and roll down in to the mill. And there was actually trees growing up the skidway, so it hadn't been run for a long time. And Hugh and Lloyd, his brother, worked on the mill trying to get it back together again. And it was very instrumental. That I don't know if it ever would happen if Barry's grandfather hadn't been involved. He was
Herman Williams.
Yeah, he was an old timer, and he knew a lot about mills. He ran mills his whole life. He sawed forever in a Quabbin, I guess, and he knew a lot about this mill. And he was instrumental in putting this place back together. So anyway, they got it going, and I had Hugh, as I said, for a professor at UMass, and he went in the fall of '72, later Columbus Day weekend. He and his brother wanted to have a little open house for our class to come up. Well, I'm the only one that came out from the class, unfortunately. But anyway, we sawed some lumber, and so that was my first good look at the mill, and I had no idea the impact it was going to have on my life. Some of the things that really stick out in my mind still is the smell of sawdust. We were cutting pine, and it just permeated the air. It was a great smell. The other thing is when you open the turbine, there wasn't a diesel motor then. When you open the turbine, you could hear the rush of the water, and then you could feel the building just come alive. It shook. The whole building had a vibration to it, and it was unbelievable. And we saw it, and the carriage, as you said, we sat upstairs. The carriage would just go so slowly by, and we had a lot of fun doing that. But we found out that we could only saw for 2 or 3 hours a day, because we'd run the water right down. So off and on, we'd have a rainy day. We could saw all day, but we had orders that we couldn't fill, and we just couldn't keep up. We saw we weren't going to be able to make enough to support everybody. So we built a mill across the river. But we had some long timbers that we cut. That's why this mill still is in existence, because it's had the ability to saw those long logs. And we did this, a couple of the bridges in town, I can't remember where, but Larry LeClaire probably knows, but we saw some timbers, white oak timbers, I think, for the bridges. They were just small bridges. And then we had a couple of orders for, I think we had some 36-foot pieces that we had to do, and that took us forever. Like Barry was talking, that the lumber went out to the front there on skids. Well, these were so long we had to come out the end door there, and stack them over here. But it's a beautiful building. It's just I hope it's around for another few hundred years. That's pretty much what I had. We had once we built a mill. Once we built the mill across the river, we kind of walked away from this a little bit, and really didn't get this going again until we started doing post and beam houses. This was kind of like well, it was on our brochure and everything. It was like instant credibility. Everybody kind of assumed that some of their timbers were going to come from an old mill, which we tried to do for the most part. That's really when Barry got involved, right?
Yeah, well, actually, I started working with my father at a very young age, logging, and long before I actually worked here, I was helping him bring logs in here, supply logs for you guys some of the time, and I even helped my grandpa Herman Williams a couple of times when he needed an extra hand, and I just happened to be around bringing logs in with my father or something. We would help him, so I was involved that way. But then in the very early 80s, and I can't remember the exact date, I'd have to dig through a lot of paperwork, I found out that Hugh and Lloyd wanted someone to come run the mill as you guys were, starting to operate that mill. They wanted to have this mill going, supplying as many of the timbers as it would do, and sometimes cutting long ones. So they got my uncle Jim Black involved, asked him if he was willing to saw, and he said, I will be if my nephew Barry will take away. So that's when I started working here. Like I said, I can't pinpoint the date, but I know it was the early 80s. And we did that together for probably about 3 years. And then I got taken away by you because you were starting a carpentry business, and you asked me if I wanted to help you, and I decided to do that. So I think my brother came down and helped here some, and then there were some other guys that got involved. Even Ronnie Wheeler from across the way would come over and help when my Uncle Jim needed extra help.
When you guys were sawing, for the most part, you were sawing on the diesel, I believe, right?
Well, yes. What had happened was, since they knew that they couldn't run it, especially in the summertime, you couldn't run the mill long at all on water. They got a diesel power unit in here, and it was connected up to the same shaft, and it had a pony motor. So the original thought was to start it with a pony motor, but it never started well with the pony motor. We had a lot of trouble. So I'm not sure if my Uncle Jim came up with this idea, but what we started doing was we would literally hook up all the belts, and we would start the water power and throw the clutch slowly in on the diesel, and that would spin the diesel over, and it would fire up every time. Never had a problem starting it. If we had a lot of water, we would unhook, leave the clutch out on the diesel, and run it with just water. If we didn't have a lot of water, we would run them both, and when the water ran low, we would take the flat belt off of the big pulleys and run just the diesel. But if we had good water power and the diesel running, we could really saw.
Yeah.
It wasn't fast,
Yeah.
but it was steady.
Right.
And
It was a limited speed to the carriage.
It was
anyway,
a limited
no matter
speed,
what you had for power.
but the saw would keep up its high speed, and you could go along at a pretty good clip. And then I started my own sawmill a few years later on Hemingway, and I was able to get back into using this mill a little bit, even though it hadn't been run very much in a few years. I got some bridge timber orders from Will Stratford at the town of Leverett, and my father, my uncle, and my brother all came down here a few times and sawed some long bridge timbers. Probably the longest ones were in the neighborhood of 28 or 30 feet for the Coal Kiln Bridge, for the Moran's Falls Bridge up towards Moore's Corner, and I think we might have even done the Coal Kiln Bridge later, but I'm not sure about that one.
It was really hard to get the logs, the right logs that length, and it was a major chore to get the logs into the mill
and get the timbers back out.
and get the timbers out.
What we
and
did,
deal with all the boards
Yeah.
that you had along.
what
with
we
it.
did was, since we had the good front end loader here, whether it was mine or whether I was using the Curleys, we would put one log in, we would saw it, guys taken away would deal with all the boards, and we would bring the timber all the way back and roll it out on the skids, and then pick it up, take it out, put another log in. So that was how we handled the really long ones. And
I don't know how they did it 100 years before that. You know, I mean,
Probably
it was,
10 men.
Yeah, it was
Or more.
It was a major operation to
Back-
do those big timbers.
back when labor was cheap, they probably just had a lot
Yeah.
of men here.
Yeah.
But I know there's a great history here. I remember, I think it was was it a glazier who, and I think my grandfather might have even done this way back too, but they used to do demonstrations when they had a log that was too large to saw. They would drill a hole in the end of it and they would put dynamite in it. Think you could get away with that today? They would put dynamite in it and they would explode the log, and so it would split into several chunks, and then they could handle it. And I remember they used to actually do a demonstration of that once every 2 or 3 years or something. Here in the center of North Leverett.
Or it was firewood.
Or they had.
Or the drill bit.
At least you could handle it, right? But that's how different the times were.
But don't you remember? I mean, can you remember how the building, when you turn that thing on,
Yes.
it just
Yeah.
every timber in the whole place, the windows that rattle, everything. It just came alive. It was unbelievable.
But you were right about the smells. And
Yeah.
one thing I always loved about having a sawmill was I always smelled good, even if I shouldn't.
Yeah, it smelled good. But you
Yeah.
lived on the. But I can also remember coming up the road one morning, and you could smell a mill when you got close. But there was a different smell. What the heck is that smell? And I got up here, and the whole valley is smoky. It was kilns.
Oh,
That
kilns.
was the first time that I had been around when the kilns were burning, and it was.
Yeah.
It took us a while to
Couldn't get
get
away
rid
with
of the
that
smell.
today
We
either.
were actually in the office here then. The reason we had the office here, we were in the landscape architecture business. Hugh, who was my professor, hired me as a student, and it was the three of us, and we were in landscape architecture. And the economy just it was worse than it is now. It fell apart, and then the landscape architecture business was pretty much out the window. We were doing a couple projects around the world. Hugh was an amazing landscape architect, and he worked for the Architect Collaborative in Cambridge, and they were doing projects around the world. And he left there, and they kept giving him a few projects to work on. So we did quite a few projects, but the economy just fell apart. So that was the major reason that we turned to the mill for a living. And that was it.
Yeah, can I ask some questions? The spillway, what do you know about the spillway itself? The wooden portion of the dam?
I honestly don't know anything about it. I'd like to know more about it. I don't know why it was there. I don't know if they had some other kind of small mill over there or something, or if there was an original wheel. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. To me, that ought to be eliminated and continue the dam over the other side if it was ever possible. It's just kind of a nuisance right now.
And when was the additional height put onto the dam?
That was before me.
In the 40s, maybe 50s?
It was probably what we had talked about that and looked at some of the things under the mill, and I think it was the hurricane of '38 that probably did some damage and forced them to make some adjustments.
So it would also give a greater height and more capacity in the mill pond.
Yeah,
And more static pressure.
More static pressure.
right. And the fact that the road used to be on that side of the mill created a much bigger mill pond. And they also this was one of, I think, 17 mills between the Connecticut River and Lake Wyola, and all the mills had rights in the dam at Lake Wyola, so they could somewhat control water being let out of Lake Wyola up there. So everybody, they were involved. You know, I'm sure some of them had more power over it than others. You know, but this was I would guess this was the biggest mill on the river. I don't know what was up
Certainly
opposite
had
Sperry Road there.
certainly had the highest capacity for
Yeah.
length. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's even the book mill in Montague that was part of the operation, and the mill down the street that you talked about used to be Brown's there, Woody Brown's.
Most of the mills back then were like mine on Hemingway, they only had a 16-foot carriage.
Hmm.
You know, maybe a couple had 18, but
Yeah,
I forget how long this one is, but it's
Right.
much longer than that.
right, this was exceptional, this
Yeah,
was,
it really was.
they sawed timbers for barns and
Yeah.
things like that.
And they used to have a board nailed up over the front that said Sawmill River Lumber Company.
That's not there anymore?
No. And,
Oh, what happened to that?
And it was, wasn't it, I think it was 40
Yeah, well,
feet long?
yeah,
Is
it
that-
was, there were 3 boards, there were 3 of them upstairs, up, well, not the attic, well, kind of the attic, and there were 3 boards up there, and we took one and got it planed, and Hugh did the lettering on it, and I can't believe that board's gone.
I don't think it's there. I haven't
Really?
noticed it, no.
Oh,
But I
that-
remember it was
that
there
must
for
have
a long
gone
time.
when the roof came
When the
down.
roof collapsed, yeah, that
Oh,
would have ruined it.
shame.
Yeah. But jumping back to the subject of how much things have changed and the things we could get away with that we couldn't now. When I was working here and we were sawing timbers, as I was telling these folks a few minutes ago, the slabs would go on to one sled. The big timbers would go on to a second drag. The smaller timbers would go on to a third, wide boards onto a fourth, and small narrow boards onto a fifth. I would then go over, get the loader from the sawmill side or the post and beam side, I guess it was then, drive it across the bridge, drag out whatever sled was full, whether it be slabs or whether it be, well, actually sometimes the slabs went here, but timbers, pick them up, and I would drive it up and I would drive it right across that bridge. And it took up the whole bridge sometimes because the timbers
Yeah.
were quite long. And, you know, most of the time I'd make it across without a vehicle coming. But if one came, they just had to stop. These days, there'd be so many vehicles coming at certain times of the day, you couldn't possibly do that, and I'm sure someone would get up in arms about it, and the cops would have to stop us from doing that. But that's how we did it back then. Drove it right across.
In the summer of 1973, I think that was the year the bicentennial for Leverett, well, bicentennial. Anyway,
Yeah.
but we had the mill all cleaned up and it's perfect logs on the skidway and everything. We had a few demonstrations during the they used to have they had a few stops around Leverett that people could go to for the bicentennial, and actually we used a lot of the slabs that we had made then for the bonfire that night up at the school there.
Mm-hmm. That was a big one too, I remember that.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah.
We were saving slabs for a while. So,
Yeah.
and then also that summer we had a little bit of a convention here with New England Lumbermen's Association in conjunction with the fellow that used to run the Quabbin Reservoir over there. And it was just to get together of mill owners and workers and loggers and stuff like that. And we had a
Bruce
couple
Spencer?
What was that?
Bruce Spencer?
Bruce Spencer, yeah. And we had a couple of competitions and a cookout and all that kind of stuff. And we also, I remember doing it. Took a great big pine log like this and dumped it into the pond from the bridge. And everybody tried to see if they could stand on this log. Well, the problem was it was a perfectly round log. So you couldn't begin to stand on the damn thing. No one stood on it, but it was fun.
Everybody ended up wet then.
Yeah. It was but the pond was deep enough then, and it didn't have all that silt that's in there now. It was deep enough so you could dump that thing in and swim, and now you can stand on it.
It never came down and went over the dam.
No. It was.
Did any of you?
It was a big one. No. We saw when the pond was when we'd run the mill down sometimes and we started across the street. I used to walk across the dam to get to the other side rather than up and around. But you had to be careful because there was a little algae on there. You had to be real careful. No one ever went over the edge.
Not that we know of anyway.
Yeah. Upstairs, and you might not want to know this, and you might want to edit it. There was a hole in the wall over by one of the windows with a funnel.
Yeah, they might want to
Yeah.
edit that.
But
Well, there was no restroom, right?
That's all right. Once again, things you wouldn't get away with today.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But,
You said something about that's how you made your living. How much did you make to make a living? And could, like, I know Perry Glacier had 5 or 6 children. I mean, did they have a good living? They had
Did
a
they have
family,
what?
a good living being a sawyer?
No.
My
I'm gonna say no.
my grandfather had a saying. He used to say, "No one ever got rich running a sawmill.
Yeah,
Once it got in your blood, you did it even though it didn't." make you
exactly.
rich.
And I can remember his grandfather saying it gets in your blood, it gets in your blood, and
Yeah.
it does.
And it does.
It honestly does.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned needing to sharpen the teeth on the saw. How often do you have to do that?
Well, that varies greatly
Yeah.
with what you are sawing and how the logs were logged. If they were dragged out with a skidder and they're covered with dirt and you don't have a debarker, which we didn't here, you can sharpen 2 or 3 times in
Yeah.
a 4-hour morning. If the logs are nice and clean, were logged out cleanly and didn't get any stones ground into them, sometimes you can run all day without sharpening. But most of the time, even if the logs are clean, you would sharpen it before the next morning, at least a little, just give it a quick run around.
Yeah, we used to sharpen every morning and then after lunch, but
Yeah.
so, and then once you sharpen the teeth enough, then you replace the teeth on the saw. It's not like a saw you see on a skill saw today or something. It had removable teeth, and so we used to change those.
Yeah,
How did you sharpen them? What tool?
I always did it by hand, but they have a thing called a jockey.
It is a grinder, yeah.
It's a grinder, a special grinder that I think Bernie Jablonski used to use
Yeah, I
here.
think so too, yeah.
I never used one. I always did it by hand. We'd sit on a little wooden block,
Yeah.
put one leg on one side of the saw. Obviously, the mill's not running. One leg on one side of the saw, one leg up on the thing,
Yeah.
and just with a big file, just do it by hand. And
Yeah,
I always
didn't
felt I
take
could
that
get
long.
it the sharpest.
Yeah.
No, and I used to saw a lot of logs that came in from excavators where they would drag them around and put them in their dump truck, and they'd be very dirty. And when that would happen, a lot of times I would take an axe and try to chop myself a clean line and then turn the log up so that it would be clean. If the dirt was going out the bottom, it made a big difference. If you were dragging the dirt through the entire cut, you wouldn't go long at all. But there were times, especially in cold weather, if stuff was frozen on, where you might file 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the afternoon if you were really doing some dirty logs.
Yeah.
But like Bill said, if they were clean, once a day or at the most twice in an entire day would do it. And then, like he said, you would replace them probably after a 2 to 4 week period, depending on how much dirt you were hitting. You would replace all of them with new teeth. Back then, they were about $1 a piece, and they averaged about 50 teeth
Yeah.
in the saw.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure there are a lot more than that.
Yeah, there's very few people that use a circular mill anymore. Right now, most of the mills around now are bandsaws.
Yeah, and all the mills, even the little ones that they, like misers and the ones that are run by 1 or 2 men, have some kind of a debarking device too, because it's very hard to get totally clean logs in from anybody anymore. And
Yeah.
some of the really big mills wet them.
Yeah.
They actually
Yeah.
put the logs out in the yard, and they spray water on them constantly. It keeps, it not only does it
Yeah,
get rid of any dirt, but it keeps the bugs
Keeps the
away.
look- yeah,
and it
keeps. I mean, some of those mills have 2 years worth of logs.
Yeah,
So
keeps
they
the bugs out of them.
They can't afford to have the
and
logs go
also-
bad on them.
It also keeps the blue stain out of them. That used to be a real problem in the summertime, especially with pine logs.
There used to be one. I don't know. I never saw one here. We had one somewhere that I worked, but it was a little pull down blade
Like a
and,
top saw.
Yeah, and which would be right straight up where the blade was gonna go, and you'd run that along the log as the log went by.
I think
And
Stephen
that-
Puffer had one up
Oh,
at his mill.
did he? Yeah,
and
it's
shoots for
a
him.
pretty neat little thing,
I
you know?
think he had one.
Fun.
Yeah. I never had one.
And there was only one place really to get mill equipment, so I don't know where anybody gets it today, but there was a manufacturer up in Orange, Chase
Turbine.
Chase
Yeah.
Chase Machinery and Supply, yeah,
Machinery Mill Works,
and
yeah.
they're long gone, but so
You have to
I
go
don't-
up into northern Vermont or New Hampshire now, I think, to find any
Yeah,
place that
yeah,
has
there was
that
another
stuff
manufacturer, I
anymore.
think they're going to Lane up in
Lane.
Vermont.
Mhm.
They were gone, so.
What do you know about the history of it before your time? What were the stories that you heard?
With me, it was the dynamite thing, which always, made quite an impression on me. But there are old pictures somewhere, I don't know where they are, but there are old pictures with so many logs and so many slabs and so many timbers and lumber around that I don't even know how they operated. This whole front yard was just
Well,
full.
it's not in the front yard, they had
And-
lumber all stacked over there in the field.
And that's going well back into, the old days of pictures that I have seen them in the past. Now I don't know where they are. If I knew this day was coming then, I obviously would have grabbed them or tried to salvage them.
I got one old picture that was taken from up here on the hill, and it was before the road was in there, and it looks down across the valley. You folks may have seen it, but it shows all the logs
And
here and the lumber.
And there were hardly any trees
Yeah,
on this
right,
whole mountain.
right.
There were hardly any trees.
Yeah, so it's probably.
I've seen that picture too.
And then lumber all on that side of the river.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean-
this
I mean,
whole
even-
mountain, the Chestnut Hill across the way, there was a time when there were hardly any trees on it. It's amazing to see.
All in New England was basically buried, but yeah.
Yep.
But you can just imagine how hard it was to get the logs here, saw the lumber, do something with it, and then haul it out of here and take it wherever it's going.
All with
I don't know how
horses
they
and a
did
lot
it.
of men.
I don't know how they did it.
Horses and a lot of men. And in some of those old pictures that I saw, there were a lot of men here. They didn't operate it with two guys.
Yeah, no,
They
no,
operated
no.
it with several people.
Can you operate year around?
Sure.
All year?
Sure.
Yeah,
In the winter?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, oh,
Dead
yeah.
of winter, what happened in the dead of winter to keep warm?
Well, well, you worked. Because it's just like when we were building houses, you work, you keep going. But, I mean, I assume it's at some point that the the dam froze enough so that they couldn't operate them. But
Yeah.
for the most part, they had to make a living year round, you know?
Yeah, I think my uncle used to, if we knew we had to saw on a really cold morning, he would actually leave the gate open just a little bit so that the water would continue moving through, because we knew we needed to start the diesel. Even if we didn't need the water power the next day, we knew we needed
Yeah.
diesel to start, and that's how we started.
And on those cold mornings, this valley and this mill is so cold.
Mhm.
You don't see the sun. We didn't see the sun here in the wintertime, and I don't know, till 10 o'clock
Till
or something.
10
if you were
o'clock, then
lucky.
it was gone by 1 o'clock.
Boy, oh boy, yeah, it was a cold, this is a cold.
And that's not exaggerating, I
It's a
don't think.
cold, damp spot.
Yeah. It
Chilly right now.
is, yeah.
Barry, what was the thing you were referring to about blue spotting or
Blue stain.
blue stain?
It's a type of mold, isn't it,
Yeah,
Bill?
yeah,
It's a
mold.
mold that particularly with pine logs, it can happen to hardwood logs too, but it's a particular problem with pine logs in warm, humid weather.
Moist conditions, yeah.
Yeah, where oddly enough, this blue stain will form right inside the log, and even if it hasn't, sometimes you'll saw the lumber, put it out even on sticks to dry, and then it'll form while it's in the lumber pile. It can be a real problem during the mid part of summer. Oddly enough, if I don't understand the science behind it, but if they put them out in a pile and they spray water on them, it's water, it's moist, but it doesn't happen. It keeps that from happening, and it keeps the bugs from eating them too. So, but oddly enough, blue stain actually became like a character trait that people wanted.
Yes, pretty in some of the boards. you know.
Yeah.
It really is.
But when I had my mill and was also working here, most of the time people didn't want blue stain, so it was a faux pas to have blue stain. But years later, it became
I actually liked it. I thought it was
it
good.
became popular. It actually became popular, and bug holes in the lumber also became popular for people who do like half walls in their basements with wainscoting or something.
Or
And
restoration work
actually-
sometimes.
Yeah, they wanted
Even-
the little wormholes.
Even furniture.
Well, they start as bugs and turn into worms, and then they just eat and eat and eat. And you used to come out into any mill yard that had slabs in it. In the evening, you could hear them chewing. They were that loud. There'd be that many of them. You would hear them. You would hear them chewing. It'd be like and you would hear that in the summertime all the time.
But they didn't eat enough to get rid of the slabs for you.
No, no, and they didn't produce any sawdust for us
No.
either, not enough to make any difference. Because sawdust was always a good commodity. Never had a problem getting rid of sawdust. At least I didn't.
So, one question I would have is, this effort now to preserve the mill, and see what's happening. What, in your minds, would you like to see happen here?
What I'd like to see happen, and what really I expect will happen, will probably be two different things. Obviously, I don't believe the mill will ever be an operating mill again, but I am very happy to have the building preserved, and I'd love to gather up as many pictures as we can, place them all through it, and have it be like a museum that people can come and look at, and the few people who know some of the stories can share the stories with them. And that will keep me happy, just to keep that happening. What about you, Bill?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I don't think it'll ever operate again either, just because of the way the laws are and the insurance companies and all that kind of stuff. But I'd like to see it. I'd like to see the dam repaired to the point that you could fill the pond back up. I mean that has such an unbelievable, beautiful effect. You get the reflection of the trees, the mill, and everything else. You got that nice, peaceful pond, and on the other side you got the crashing water. It's really the sound, the sound. Like I was saying before, you turn on the mill, the whole thing is shook. But the other thing was the sound and the smell. It'd be nice to duplicate those. It'd be nice to have a sawdust pile around, you know, so
Somebody come and steal it.
so if the kids came, people come with the kids to see the old mill or something, kids playing sawdust or something.
Yeah,
Simple like that.
I don't know hardly any people from my lifetime era who didn't want their wedding pictures taken in front of that waterfall. I know very few people who that was like the first thing they wanted was a picture after their wedding in front of that waterfall.
Yeah.
How about the sawdust pile? How big did it get? Who did you have take away the sawdust?
There were times when it got really big, but then sawdust became a little more of a commodity when I was working here, and then we had trouble keeping enough to supply the people that wanted it. Garville Farms used to take a lot of it when I was here, but there were others, Gun Farm, Williams Farm.
Who used to do
Wayne
all the-
LeClaire.
Wayne LeClaire used to.
Wayne LeClaire.
Right, he was.
She's a relative of Wayne's.
He basically just sold sawdust, so he had to.
Yeah.
He had an interest
But
in trying to get there.
You know, we had to almost like ration it. I mean, the Curleys did,
Yeah.
because we never made enough of it to supply everyone who wanted it.
No, he didn't
People
make that much here. We used to make a lot of it on the other side over there, but for a long period of time, we were sawing a lot of oak and maple. We were making railroad ties, and that was not. It was a more fine sawdust, had obviously a different smell, and it wasn't as popular with the farmers. It didn't have the
Wasn't good for animal bedding.
the absorbent,
Yeah,
and
not good for animal
yeah,
bedding.
yeah, it was too fine.
So was there a sluice gate here when you worked here?
Was there what?
A sluice gate? On the left-hand end of the mill, there's a sluice gate that the water's running through right now.
Yeah.
Was that there when?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now, how did you open and close it?
There was a timber that went out, and at one point there was a crank, but I think that was gone. But we used to use a come along and pull it up, and you know, so we could clean out around the turbine and down there. And we'd also had to pull it down every now and then to change a post that goes down into the water. Those don't last forever, and you gotta be careful with the ice on those too. So, and then lower it back down, fill it back up again.
How much
then-
of the structure do you think is original?
How much of the structure? Somebody said at some point that this mill, and I don't know how they determined it, that this mill was extended out on both ends, that when it was originally built, it wasn't the size that it is now. So, and I don't know how much longer after it was put in here that happened, but it's basically all original. Depends when you want to start. You know, if that was only a few years after it was made, but
Yeah, other than the
I
few-
don't know the date that this went in.
Other than the few 2x you see stuck in to help, you know, reattach the siding in some places or whatnot, all of this looks pretty original
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah, it wasn't very. I don't think it was a very long period of time from when it was expanded out.
Right.
But I mean, when you think about the preparation to do this mill before the mill was here. First of all, you've got to find a spot in the river that's going to work for you. Then you accumulate all these stones, and big stones, and you start to build the base for the mill, for the dam. Massive
Huge
undertaking.
undertaking.
That must have. I mean, I would guess it took a couple of years just to do that, to get ready to build the mill itself.
In a day when nobody had any equipment.
And then the lumber to build the mill had to obviously come from another mill. So what they did, and what we did over on the other side too, is that we basically got the very bare minimum of structure so we could get the mill going, and then we built the mill up around us. And that's probably what happened here. I would guess that from the first floor up, that all of those timbers were sawn on the mill here. You know? Hard to know for sure.
Yep. Long time ago.
Yeah.
1716.
That's amazing.
What do you think the mill meant to the people in the community at the time when you were working here?
Employment. A lot of employment for
Yeah.
quite a few people, I'm sure.
Yeah, they probably live right local here.
Yep.
Didn't go too far.
Yeah. I mean, commerce back then was pretty limited in this area, but lumber and logging had a big part in the commerce in this area. I know that just from stories from my grandfathers. It was a big thing in the valley.
I would imagine some of the lumber, and then not always long timbers or anything like that, but some of the lumber probably got used by the box shop up there in the center when that was active. That apparently was a pretty good sized business, and they would
And your
and
bucket shop down here.
and the bucket shop.
Yeah. Now, didn't, well, I don't know if you were still here or not, but didn't they saw some replacement timbers for old Ironsides in this mill?
I don't remember.
I thought I
wasn't part of
remembered
that.
hearing that. I was pretty young, but I thought that I heard that they were commissioned to saw quite a few when they rebuilt old Ironsides and needed a lot of wood for it, that some of them were done here.
One thing that we did saw here, and so a lot of the timbers came from here, is we during the blizzard of '78, motif number 1 got lifted off its dock and taken out to sea, and we actually rebuilt motif number 1, and the timbers came from here, and it's 100% exact duplicate of what was there. I had the drawings. It was well documented by a number of architects, and I took the drawings and created a post and beam frame with it that was right to the 1/4 inch of what was there, and we did a post and beam frame, and those timbers came from here. So if you're ever down at Rockport and you see that, you can peek in the window. You'll see the frame that we built.
Definitely will do that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
As I'm recalling now, you'd have to fact check me on the old Ironsides, because I remember them talking about it, and I remember Hugh Curley being very excited about it. But now it popped into my mind that they may not have been able to get the logs they needed to do it. So they may not have actually done it, but they were asked to. Yeah, that may be how it turned out.